Greetings and salutations. Neal Isaacs, the Raleigh business broker, coming to you with another educational video. And today's topic is about your financial story. What is a financial story? Well, I'm a business intermediary. We help owners with their options for exit. Business buyers want to know how's the business doing? What does that mean? Well, I call that the financial story. And I'm going to share some examples of financial stories over time. And I'm going to zone in on how did the pandemic affect the financial story. Does that sound like a good way to spend our time today? Good. I'm glad you agreed. If you haven't stopped watching now, don't stop, because I want to share something with you. Let me bring up this. All right, here we go. Let's start with this financial story. I call this the pandemic rebound. Annual revenues and discretionary earnings over time. This is what we always look at. The two most important features of your business are how much is going in and what was left at the end of the year for the owner. This is different than NOI. This is different than your paycheck. This is different than the bottom line. This is SDE or cash flow. We have done a lot of videos about that. But let's look at these patterns. So this was a business. These are all real businesses. I've blinded them. I think we sold this one last year. And this is pretty standard. We had a pandemic in 2020, and this business did for 25. They got hurt during the pandemic, and then they bounced back. The interesting things that I look at are they stayed flat. Even though they lost money during the pandemic, they got leaner. And then this is a great trend. They came right back as soon as the pandemic started to succeed, and the proportion of cash flow to revenues remained where we'd expect it to. So this is a pretty good pandemic rebound. Most business buyers would probably not fault an owner if they saw this dip in 2020. People expect that depending on the type of the business. Let's keep looking. So here's a different story, same treatment, and now we have a little bit more data. This business peaked in 2020, did less revenue 2021, and even less in 2022. And even more concerning is the cash flow is getting worse. Interesting here, they got lean during the pandemic, the year after the pandemic, and this business kept the same amount with less revenues. Do you think a buyer would be interested in how they did that? Do you think that maybe they reduced their payroll or included less cost of goods sold to make the same product and possibly hurt the quality? So this is where we go in diligence. This is what people are interested in. And why hasn't it rebounded? These are all buyer questions that come out of the financial story. So I call this purge then crash. And it's a story. Whether you know your story or not, there is a financial story. These are tax returns. This one is from P&Ls. Tax returns are carved in concrete. They've been submitted to the IRS. Yes, they could be changed, but these are the facts. So it's good to look at these. You probably know your revenues. You may not know your SDE, your cash flow. Talk to me about that. Let's keep looking. I got a couple more, I think. I call this ideal financial performance. Because here we got 4 years, good top line revenues, and we see a small dip as most businesses did. But then we see it bounce right back, and we see this trend right here of growth. And we can almost see that if there wasn't a pandemic, where they would be. Incremental growth, no hockey stick. By the way, if this was up at $8-10 million, that's a cause for concern as well, because it seems unsustainable. But any business buyer is going to see this and say they are doing something right. And the percentage of cash flows of revenue is relatively consistent. So they're probably not cutting corners. I like this one. I get really excited when I see a financial story like this because it just shows the owner is on course, doing a great job, and buyers are going to get really excited about this. And here's an interesting one. This one's going back in time a little bit. A real financial story from the books. This is a while back. This is pre-pandemic, if you remember those times. Strong revenues got better, but what happened to their EBITDA? EBITDA and cash flow are similar, but this was after managers are paid. The EBITDA dropped in 18, and then it came back to 2017 numbers, even though the business did an extra, what's that, $1.5 million? Something's off here. And my knowledge of this one was the books were not clean. The books, there was a lot of questions that went unanswered. So there may have been a more consistent path, but it wasn't in the financial story. It wasn't what was documented. So, this would probably, if this business went under contract and based on doing 1.5 million in EBITDA, I think that a buyer's going to have a lot of questions, and it may not make it to closing unless there were some really, really good answers of why. There's a loss of confidence when the financial story doesn't follow a trend, or when there's just no good answers for why it's like that. I mean, it represents volatility. Buyers pay for cash flow and earnings, and cap rates are based on risk. The more risk, the lower the cap rates, the lower the multiple. And the last financial story I want to share with you is going way back to, this was during the pandemic. We sold a business. I'll disclose this was a business with a drive-through, restaurant/beverage business with a drive-through. We sold it during the pandemic. We sold it end of the year. But here's how, what I just showed you was year over year. Now we broke it down to month over month. This was the only way to really, during the pandemic, to chart a future. So we can see, was the business seasonal by the month? A little bit. With the 19 and then with 18 and then 19 got a little better each month, and it followed these same seasonal trends. And then we got a pandemic. Look at these yellow. February of 2019 going into 2020 was the last. February 2020 is the last normal month. We can clearly see that the pandemic hurt this business. And if you remember, the pandemic started in March, mid-March, so they got a half a month, and then they truncated, and then boom, not a very strong April 2020, not a very strong May 2020. But then look, it started to catch up with 2019. We did this before July was available. But here we can see on a month-to-month comparison that the business was starting to rebound during the pandemic. That's how we were able to sell this business. If this yellow line had dropped and continued to falter and had not rebounded, we would not have been able to sell this business. But this is the analytical viewpoint that we can look at. And this is net sales only. This didn't get into cash flow. But instead of with all these other ones looking at it from an annual basis, during the pandemic, we were going month to month with this type of analysis. Same patterns that we're looking for. All right, let me stop the share and come back to you here. So here, what are the takeaways from looking at the financial story? Number one is every business has a financial story. Do you know what your financial story is? If not, you probably know your revenues. Do you know your cash flow? Talk to an intermediary about that. And then number two, does it make sense? Is it charting along and you can explain why the cash flow is lower or higher than previous years based in relation to your revenues? And thirdly, I think is the story about if there's an issue with the books and you can't explain it, that's when you really need to work with your advisors so that you can defend your financial story. I hope that's helpful. This is the type of stuff that I do as an intermediary. If I can help you, please reach out to me. I'd love to help you figure out what A, your cash flow is, and B, what your financial story over time is. I'm Neal Isaacs, the Raleigh business broker, and it's been a pleasure sharing this knowledge with you. Put your thoughts in the comments. If you have something discreet and confidential, direct message me. Love to help you out. Thanks for watching. Until next time, have a great day.